The Unknown Chronicles. I have managed to transcribe one of the stories from the journal, From Whence We Came. It seems to be the origin story of the person known as Neptune. I assume this because scrawled underneath the title it has his name scrawled. I will write down the story in its entirety, and then add my own thoughts afterwards. Here it is, verbatim. The door on the second floor of my childhood home wasn't always there. Sometimes it sat at the end of my hallway, a deep purple color oddly enough, its bronze doorknob beckoning me to open it. This was my first experience with the unknown, beginning when I turned 8, just like all of you. My house had 2 floors, the first containing a living room, a dining room, a kitchen, a half-bath, and a bedroom, and the second containing 3 bedrooms and bathroom. But sometimes, a 5th door would be found. It seemed that only I could see it, as occasionally my parents would pass it. The door was located right next to my own. Thinking back, it was actually attached to the wall where my room sat just behind, at the very end of the hallway. Most of the time it wasn't there, but whenever I was angry, whenever I was truly upset, it would show. As a child I would sometimes mention it to my parents, but they would chalk it up to my imagination. As the gift was truly taking effect at that point in my life, I would tend to see a lot of the unknown and tell my folks. Sometimes I would tell myself it wasn't there, sometimes I would dare myself to open it, but no matter what I did, that door filled me with dread, as if it sat there as an entrance into hell itself. The door never harmed me, it never really did anything. That is, until the day I saw Mars kiss Venus. As most of you know by now, I had a crush on Venus back in grade school, before Mars and she began dating. I was so tempted to ask her out, and eventually began admiring her during recess and after school when Saturn, Mars, Venus, Vulcan, Minerva, Ceres, Diana, and I would all hang out, before we met Apollo and his friends. I remember I told Mars I liked Venus, without knowing he did as well. So when I caught him kissing her, I was filled with rage, absolutely filled. I rushed home, seething to the core, without listening to anything Mars or Venus had to say. I stormed into my house and pounded up the stairs, knowing my parents would be home for another hour or so. Just before I entered my room, however, I stopped dead in my tracks. There it stood, the sometimes door, a deeper purple than it had ever been. Its handle simply sparkling in the sunlight that poured through the window just beside it. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I found myself walking towards the door, placing my hand on its knob, which felt cold to the touch, ice cold. The knob practically turned itself, and the door creaked open, breaking the silence that befell my home. It was dark in the room, dark and cold. I stood only in the doorway, suddenly realizing the situation I had placed myself in. A feeling I can't quite explain overcame me. As if all my anger had turned to serenity, but I was filled with dread at the same time. A battle began to form inside of me, one to decide exactly how I felt. But, before I could decide to turn away, I realized it was too late. Something ushered me forward, and I took a step into the darkness. Each step I took echoed, as if I were walking in a deep cavern. There was no light, I couldn't even make out my hand if I placed it in front of my face. It was just total darkness. I don't know why I didn't scream, why I didn't run towards the doorway, but instead let it shrink away as I walked forward. But with each step I took, I could feel another feeling bubbling up inside me, slowly clawing its way up. Suddenly, I could see a dim light just a bit ahead of me. I quickened my pace, and eventually found what was creating it. It was humanoid, which I can say. 2 arms, 2 legs, the whole shebang. But it was far from human. The thing stood a good 7 feet tall, and that's an assumption seeing as there was really no ground to measure it from. Its skin, if you could call it that, was translucent, revealing its organs as if it were some disgusting showcase at a medical museum. It let off some sort of glow, coming from right where its heart should have sat. I glanced up at its face, forcing myself to look against my better judgment, and instantly wished I had not. The thing's face was far from translucent, instead it was more of a humanistic face. It had all the characteristics, except for a nose, but everything was elongated. Its eyes were massive, sunken into its face, almost like an owl's. Its nose was long and pointed, spear-like, and its mouth faring no better, covering a good portion of its face. It smiled at me, revealing jagged rotting teeth, and my gaze fell again to the floor. Then, I realized what feeling had been clawing its way up. It was hopelessness. I thought things couldn't get any worse, but I was dead wrong. The creature spoke. "Hello, Neptune," it said. It knew my name, it knew my fucking name. "I've been waiting." I said nothing back, of course, too choked up to speak. "I've been waiting a long time, Neptune." The creature spoke, seemingly gliding around me, circling me like a shark circles its prey. "I've been watching you grow, watching you sleep and eat and grow up to be the boy you are today." I was frozen in place, not even flinching when the creature wrapped its arms around my waist. "Now something has really upset you, Neptune. Something out there has really made you want to escape. I'm so glad you are here now, I really am. I can make you feel better, I can make you happy, forever." The creature turned me around, and I could see the light from the doorway begin to fade, shrinking more and more. "Now you are here, Neptune, now you are safe. No one will ever hurt you again." I don't know what it was, but I suddenly snapped out of it. I began to sprint, faster than I had ever sprinted before, rushing towards the ever-fading light of the doorway. "Don't run, Neptune. I only want to love you," the creature screamed from somewhere behind me in the darkness, the pitch of its voice significantly dropping. I pressed on, it seemed like an eternity, the doorway's light nearly disappearing in the darkness. But I reached it, I was nearly there, nearly home. I felt the sharp pain first, then was tackled to the ground. The creature was right on top of me, grabbing hold of my leg and beginning to drag me away from the door. I began screaming, kicking at the creature, forcing it off. "I will take all of your pain away," the creature shrieked. I began gripping in the darkness, desperately trying to grab a hold of something, but to no avail. I couldn't even feel the floor beneath me. I gave up, I let it begin to drag me and began to sob to myself, and the creature had won. Nothing could save me, or so I thought. I began to think of everything I was going to miss, my family, my friends, school, pizza, and then I thought of her. I thought of Venus. Another burst of energy surged through me, and I kicked the monster square in its jaw, making it loosen its grip on my leg just enough for me to squirm out of it. I shot up, the light from the door now only a small slit barely recognizable in the darkness, and sprinted away. The creature shrieked, grabbing at me again, tearing through my clothes and skin with what seemed like sharp talons, but I pressed on. I smacked into the door and it sprung open, filling me with life and expelling the darkness. I passed out. I awoke to the sounds of my parents arriving home. I lay on the ground, right in front of the hall window and beside where the sometimes door sometimes sat but currently did not. My initial thought is that it was a dream, but when I rushed to the bathroom and examined myself, finding my clothes ripped and cuts across my body, I knew it was not. I was there for what seemed like an eternity, but had really been an hour. My parents came to the conclusion I had been in a fight, denying the story I told them and demanding I tell them who I fought. I was consequently grounded. The sometimes door still would appear to me, but I never dared even look at it for too long. I'm sure, even now, that door is still appearing. Even now, that creature is still waiting. My thoughts, I can honestly say I have no idea what to say. I don't know if this is something I can fully believe, but someone sure went through a lot of trouble to make this joke if it is one. I will look into what the gift and the unknown are, but it will take more decoding for me to do so. I will have another story transcribed soon, sticking to this journal for now. I have transcribed another entry from the journal, from whence we came. This one seems to be the origin of the writer of these journals, the person known as Saturn. Naturally, I have transcribed this word for word and I will again place my thoughts at the end of the story. Here it goes. I, Saturn, fully realized the gift at the age of 8 just like all of you. The first experience I had with Unknown happened soon after my 8th birthday. My family went down to my uncle's farm down south a bit, I'd say where but, well you all know the rules. Anyway, my uncle's farm was surrounded mostly by woods, and supported by a very small town just down the hill to the east. A small creek ran down the hill, mostly running across plains, but right when it hit the town it formed a sort of circle, surrounding the town on 3 sides and disappearing into the woods. A small bridge was built, naturally, to allow access inside so you didn't have to drive or walk all the way around the creek. This town didn't get much traffic, and people tended to leave to move to the big cities, so occasionally, people would go missing. Most of this was attributed to runaways, wolves, or things of that nature, but I knew the truth. I know what really happened to those people. I know they crossed the bridge, crossed it at the wrong time. Now, like I said, I was at my uncle's farm only for my birthday, we stayed for 1 week. As a child, I had a rough time staying in my bed at night. Now, when I was tempted by the rolling green hills and wonders of the country, you couldn't expect me to stay inside. So, on the 3rd night, I managed to jar open my bedroom window and sneak outside. It was great, I ran down the hills, the dew brushing against my bare feet. I sprinted and rolled down the hill, a great time. But then I saw someone. A teenage boy and girl holding hands, walking back towards the town. I decided it would be quite fun playing spy, thinking they'd sneaked out too, which I'm sure they did, likely to have sex or something of that nature, so I followed them, keeping to the shadows. They walked slowly but I managed to move quietly, long enough to see them walk onto the bridge, long enough to see them disappear. 1 second they were there, they took a step onto the bridge. I saw them, I watched them step on and then, nothing. There was no flash of light, no morphing of my vision at all, they just simply vanished. Being 8 I was curious, I was always curious, so I decided I too would step onto that bridge. I slipped down the hill quickly, and jogged over to the bridge. Before I took a step on, however, I stopped dead in my tracks. Something was wrong. I felt like I didn't belong, like someone stood before me, pointing in the other direction, screaming for me to walk away. But I stepped forward. There was no lapse in time, there was no sign of anything changing at all. It was as if I still stood in that small rural town, but it turned out I was far from it. I stood on a bridge, not a measly wooden bridge used to cross over a small creek but a mighty stone bridge, one spanning for miles and miles. I shot around, surveying my new surroundings. I saw no end to the bridge, just more and more of the faded stone until it disappeared into the horizon. To my left and my right I saw nothing but endless sea. It wasn't quiet in the least, the sounds of waves and seagulls filled the crisp air. It was bright and sunny actually, as if the sun was sitting pretty in the sky. It looked so normal, but so irregular at the same time. Then I noticed something very peculiar. I noticed the sky had not changed, the moon and the stars filled the night sky, but it was as bright as day just underneath. I began to walk, seeing no other alternative, and then noticed, in the distance, the shadow of 3 figures. It must have been the teens, I told myself, and maybe an adult that could help us. I sprinted forward, eager to see another face to quench my uneasiness. But what came into view will still haunt me to this day. The 2 teens stood there, shaking violently. They stared up at the sky, not making a sound and seemingly limp, as if someone was shaking a doll of sorts. Before them stood a man adorned in an odd one piece of white fabric that covered him from his toes to his neck and then formed a hood over his head, leaving only his face uncovered. He turned his gaze to me, and I could see three very wrong things with this man. First, his face was white. Not pale, white. Like one of those crayons from a Crayola box that no one ever uses. Second, his eyes were incredibly small, like two beads. In fact, the only other noticeable thing on his face besides his average nose and mouth was a pencil-thin mustache, and even that was larger than his beady little eyes. "Now what on earth are you doing here?" he asked in a tiny squeaky voice, one that was a higher pitch than my own even then. "You shouldn't be here, boyo." I shook my head, too frightened to give an actual response. The man giggled in response. "Well, it's not your time yet. I already have my new friends. Maybe next time at..." Before I could react, before I could even answer, things I had missed began falling into place. I looked onward, past the man, past the shaking bodies, and saw hundreds upon hundreds more. All of them lifeless, all of them shaking. They covered the bridge into the horizon. I can't even tell you an estimate of how many poor souls were doomed on that bridge. Then, the man leapt, smacking me hard in the head and causing me to black out. When I awoke, my head pounding, I found myself standing at the start of the bridge. Nothing had changed. I sprinted home and, being young, neglected to tell my parents of this experience, as I was sure I'd get in trouble for sneaking out in the first place. I believe this area should not be investigated further, as a very powerful unknown presence lurks there. My thoughts: I can say I'm just as intrigued by this as any of you are. Again, I see the gift and the unknown mentioned here, and I still have no idea as to what they might be. I will be transcribing another story very soon. On a side note, I have asked around to see if anyone remembers me mentioning anything about these journals in the past, but it comes at no avail. I have, however, come to the conclusion the city they are speaking of in this notebook is my own. I compiled a list of all local small towns down south, and may end up investing them. Stay paranoid, my friends.